everybody, it's Simon Majumdar here, and welcome to Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. Now, on this very special episode, I'm going to introduce you to a gentleman of whom I have been a huge fan since I first read The Cooking Gene, his book that was published, I believe, in 2018. And since then, I've followed him on Twitter, on social media. I know you will want to too. So this to me is really exciting. And what we're going to do is follow on from the episode we did last week where I promised you I'd be bringing on this expert to talk about rice. Let me introduce you all to Michael Twitty. Michael.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am so genuinely so excited to have you on Eat My Globe. Since I've followed you on Twitter, and I've been trying to think of a reason to have you on because I just wanted to talk to you. So I'm so pleased that we're going to talk about a specific subject. But before we do that, I'd love for you just to share who you are with everyone. For those who don't know you, they're going to want to know you after this. Please tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so the rabbis say that if you want to communicate something, you do it al regel echad, which means on one leg. So it's basically your elevator pitch. So my on one leg is, my name is Michael W. Twitty. I am a culinary historian and food writer, home cook, and in historic interpretive chef. I live in Virginia. I live in the American South. My family is Southern. I'm Black. I'm Jewish. I'm gay. I am American. And I really do believe that we walk into the kitchen with all the parts of ourselves, all of the histories that we engender and bring with us. And so that's my passion, is writing about not just food history out there, but food history in here, in us, in our brains, in our bellies, in our blood, in our roots. And to me, talking about that and relating that to people is really important, because when we open ourselves up to that kind of dialogue and vulnerability, other people do too, and we understand ourselves a lot better.
Absolutely. And I know when I follow you on Twitter, but when I read your books, and we'll talk about identity in a moment, which is something that I deal with, if that's the right word, a lot, being kind of Bengali, Welsh, American. I'm a mixture of things myself. And I find that food particularly is not only in my DNA, but I find food history as my prism of trying to explain that, whether I'm writing about the history of curry or the history of anything else. And I see that in yours all the time. Let's tell people about your books, because we have a big audience here on Eat My Globe, and they're all reading food history books. They're all reading not just from an academic point of view, what they're really trying to do and why this series exists. And I said we're on our 8th season now. They're really looking for people. They're really looking for personalities. They're really looking for food DNA, and which is what I think you're talking about as well. So let's just talk about we've talked about all of your books, but the two that really brought me into kind of your orbit were The Cooking Gene and Kosher Soul. And I will say they are two of the most kind of profound and personal books that I've ever read in food or food history. And I said here on my notes here, they both read as if they kind of exploded onto the page. And that's not to suggest they weren't well edited, but they felt very necessary. I mean, just tell me about the inspiration for those books, because I want people to go out and get them.
Yeah, so I wanted people to feel as though that they were at my kitchen table, or that we were at my dining room table and we were just casually eating, and their time was no issue, and they were just hearing my story. I really wanted to write I've already written solid academic stuff on food. One of my first and best outings, as it were, was the Oxford Symposium. And I got to tell you, I felt so privileged to be there. My paper got accepted. Wow. It was published. It was smoked and fermented foods. And I was much younger then.
Did you go to Oxford?
I mean, that was Yeah, that was 12 years ago. I
Wow.
presented that paper 2 years ago. And I had never been to England before. My mom was still around, and I had never been. And my whole life I heard about England, England, England. And so I was really excited to go. And my community made sure I went. I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort. I certainly didn't have the resources I have now, but I got on that plane and I was in Europe for 3 weeks and went to the Oxford Symposium and presented my paper, suit and tie and all. And there was Claudia Roden in the front row.
Amazing.
And so many luminaries of food and cooking.
Elizabeth Luard is there.
Yes, and it was something. It was something I never. So for me, if that was the gateway drug, that's where I had to go, right? But also, I really wanted to do more of that. But see, the thing about it is, in our system in America, it's very difficult if you aren't established to write a solidly, academic book and have it sell well.
Yes.
Otherwise, it just ends up in the overly expensive academic book heap. You have to have a popular brand. And so I went on, I did what I called the Southern Discomfort Tour. And that came after that first trip to England. And I really had this burning desire to go around the American South looking for my food and family roots and routes. I did that, raised a good number of monies on it through crowdfunding, and that was about the time that I also had after that I had a letter that I wrote to Paula Deen, open letter, and it was about her struggles with her own racial justice issues. And it wasn't really about her so much. It was about the fact that the food scene spoke more about people like her than it did Black food creatives and chefs and culinarians and sommeliers, et cetera. So that helped amplify and set the stage for the Cooking Gene, the book. And then I have this project that had all these thousands of pictures, hundreds of hours of interviews, but no real aim. It was just like, it did all this stuff for what? And then someone said, do you want to do a book? Okay, fine. So the Cooking Gene is part response to social issues, but it's, it was my DNA testing. For example, for African Americans, the DNA testing experience is not the same. And I would say that for Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latin folks, Afro-Brazilians, et cetera. We're all kind of like in the same situation where our ancestors were not documented according to their ethnic origins, not in the way that, they weren't traced the way that European immigrants were traced. Yes, people might have wanted them based on their ethnicity and their knowledge base.
Yes.
But this doesn't make it into the books, as it were. This was marketing. And so the bottom line is that we come from all these different ethnic groups, but over time, because of sales, because of the violence of enslavement, because of many other factors, we were robbed of those very specific links, and we became Black in America, not Black in Africa. This is very important to mention. And we became Black in Africa after colonialism. Those understandings that's also important. So being able to talk about which ethnic groups and what foods traditions they brought over, where these blocks were in early America, how we compared with Caribbean and Latin America, being able to talk about how the different cash crops of enslavement created specific economies that had very important links to certain food traditions. I mean, it wasn't just like, here's the food. It's not a one-stop shop like textbooks make it out to be. It actually was a history of migrations, of population movements, and also you cannot understand this without the relationship between the enslaved and enslaver, between free Black people and free whites. You cannot understand and native indigenous people. There's so many layers. So basically, the Cooking Gene is me putting that microscope on myself, going, how do all these constituent parts and my food journey make up me. Kosher Soul is a follow-up volume. In between is Rice, which I did for UNC Press.
Yes.
It's the last of their Savor the South series.
Yes.
So 20 some books. I don't know why there's a book on bacon and a book on ham separately, or why there's a whole cookbook on bourbon, but there is a reason for all these things, and I'm very proud to be involved in that. I think I'm only one of 2 Black authors in the entire series.
Wow. And that was what brought me really kind of, not the excuse, but the reason to bring you to talk about that as part of the Rice thing that we'll talk about in a moment. But Kosher Soul, to me as well, one thinks about the second album, as it were, and you'd done Cooking Gene, which was so remarkable. And then I read Kosher Soul and I go, this is every bit as remarkable about that as well. So I'd love people to hear about that, because obviously it's about your conversion and it's about so many things that you do. And you talk about that a lot on social media. So just talk a bit about Kosher Soul, because again, that just felt like it had to come out of you in a sense.
It was actually probably, these were competing projects as to what I might come out with first if I had the chance.
Right.
The words, if I had the chance. I understand that for a lot of people, food media has very specific forms. It's more of a how-to than what I am.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
It only recently, you know this more than I do, only recently have we had a scene where people can talk about how their food interplays with who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Before, it was just simply give me the recipe and keep running.
Yep.
Show me how to do this technique. Food personality, of course. I remember growing up seeing the evolution between PBS / shows from the BBC, moving into Food Network, moving into Cooking Channel, moving into food media on different cable networks. Now it's food media streaming.
Yes.
And it's only recently where we've even begun to ask questions, serious questions about food history, about food and culture, about food and politics. And so for me, those are inextricable. Food is not apolitical, and I don't get too bogged down in it, because one of the challenges for Kosher Soul has been, how do I write about something that is overshadowed by the situation in Israel-Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I write about the fact that there are cultures here that have been interactive quite some time without my involvement, that have very similar foods, very similar traditions, but the arguments are very real about what do those traditions mean? Who came up with them? Why? Who do they sustain? To talk about Jewish food in terms of it being Black. Well, we're still struggling as a Jewish family about, does Jewish a color? Is it a race? Is it ethnicity? Is it a people? Is it a religion? And how do these people who are of another diaspora, of another trauma, fit into this model? When, if you're in America, as opposed to other places, there is a very distinct and connective tissue relationship between Blacks and Jews. Mm-hmm. In Venn diagram form. And there's a history of that. I think some people come here and they find it very strange, and we don't find it strange at all, because if you're marginalized and oppressed, you go to the same places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same can be said of, what really got me about working on this project was, number one, they're both confessional, and they're both really cathartic, because I'm putting out on paper, really vulnerable experiences that I've had. One quick one is that when I had some former friends, and the young man was a rabbi, and he asked me to cook something for his group at this very prestigious institution, and I did, and I had to come over his house because his kitchen was the kosher kitchen that I had to use. And his wife, young woman, who I thought I was cool with, had a lot of like weird passive aggressive cultural anger. And I say that because she did not like the collard greens and asked a lot of questions about what were these things I brought in her house. And it got me. It was deep. And it slowly over the next day and a half, what unraveled was there were a lot of issues that I didn't know were there. And I talk a lot about that in Kosher Soul. I talk a lot about these little cultural landmines with food. But I also talk about, finding my own identity, creating my own identity through food. How do I create kosher soul food in my own household? How do other Jews of African descent make their own kosher soul food? What does that mean in terms of the wider rivers of African and Jewish tradition separate and together? And I think we all sort of have that. I mean, you could certainly write acres about that from Anglo-Indian perspective.
Yeah. Yes.
These histories are conjoined and they're complicated and they're nuanced, but millions of people have these histories as part of their heritage and legacy. So instead of imagining that we're all in these bubbles, let's talk about how it works out.
Well, I think that's really, really important. And I was going to ask you that question about identity. And I think it's useful for everyone because everyone listening to this show, and I said we've got a big audience of people who are all come from so many different food backgrounds, and we have everyone come on. And I think people are fascinated about using food as a prism. When I traveled around the world to write my first book, Eat My Globe, and I went to 31 countries, and I went to everywhere, probably more than that. Now I'm up to closing on in 100 countries. But what I find is that everywhere I go, food is the one prism that I can sit with someone who is of a different political, different religion, different, everything about them. And yet if I break bread with them, then I have a space, a kind of a civilized space where we sit together. We're not going to argue. I always say I could go down to parts of the South where people might be very different politically from me, and I can argue with them. And I go, but you can't have a big argument with a mouthful of ribs. So I can sit with people very different politically, and I can have these conversations. So I'd love to know, it's not a guide, but how do you, if people are listening to this and they go, what do I need to do? Where do I start? What do I do? Because you've done this, even though it's still an ongoing journey for you. This whole notion of identification is something that people find fascinating. And I'd just love to hear your insight on it.
One of the things is that you have to be willing to be wrong or surprised or take what you know and understand it has layers. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants, Simon, 140 character explanations for everything.
Yeah.
They want a commercial. They don't want real knowledge. You look at someone like Fuchsia Dunlop, for example, who's dedicated herself to sort of like unraveling the world of Sichuan cuisine.
Incredible. Her books are extraordinary.
Right? It's like that's what it takes, right? It takes real honing in to really get something. George Washington Carver, the famous Black scientist, born in slavery, died a very seasoned, aged man, said that if you love something enough, it'll give up its secrets to you. Maybe we don't love each other enough because culture is one of those footballs that people don't like to. We'll talk about sports or stock numbers or sports stats or entertainment. We don't, but we still resort to things, and I say we in a very loose sense. I'm not talking about you and me. We still resort to canard stereotypes, limitations, boundaries, shut doors when it comes to aspects of food and culture. So I tell people all the time, start with your own family. I have a master class about that now. How to really understand your own story. And then once you do that, once you've done that work or started that work, it's a lot easier to really appreciate other people's stuff because it's not so simple. And it is very human. And it is, like you said, when you have the food in your mouth, it's hard to say stupid things. That's the thing. That's why I tell people all the time. I said, I tell people I make kosher soul food when people are ignorant of Black and Jewish cultures and ideas and peoplehood. So they can eat the food and be quiet while I give them the truth, and hopefully they'll listen. But that's the thing about it. It's an exchange. It's a willingness to fail and to be wrong and to correct yourself. And it's like no different than when we make food and we correct the dish.
Yep.
All of those skills are the same.
This is, tell everyone about the masterclass, just because I know that you posted something about that recently. And, if people have the opportunity to go and check that out, I think they should. We'll definitely make sure we give all the social media at the end as well. But tell everyone about the masterclass because, it just sounds exceptional.
So the whole thing is, thank you. The whole thing is about, I guess we talked about how to. I can give you a class of just how do I make certain things. Not well, because I don't really, when I cook, I'm just trying to get it done.
Yep.
I'm not procedural. You know what I'm saying? I learned to cook from grandmothers. Grandmas aren't the greatest, wouldn't be the greatest TV teachers. No, you have to literally be, in the room with them, and you have to go through something 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times before you even get the tip of it. Yeah. So for me, the masterclass, the how-to is how do I understand where I come through food? How do I tell my own food story? What is the food story of people from the African Atlantic? How do we begin to share our food stories with each other? How do you trace your family story through food? How do you trace your own identity? If you didn't have the big family tree and names and connections, how would you even begin to tell your own story through food? All of that's there in that masterclass. So that's my how-to. And it's funny because at first it's like, well, what is my how-to? Is that really a how-to? But it is a how-to. It's something valuable that people I think take for granted. And I think one of the things that you hear about most, unfortunately, as people, transition from life to spirit again, is how many people will say the words, I wish I had gotten that recipe. I wish I'd had that conversation. I wish I knew more.
Yeah.
So in other words, there is no time like the present. And that dialogue isn't just with the elders. It's with you.
Yep.
It's with the children. And it's not just the old, it's the dynamic. It's the things that are changing in your own time and space. I that's why I exhort people to not think of it all as nostalgia.
No, I agree with that.
Right. It's the process, right? It's everything that you are.
I have to just share 2 elements of you talk about grandmothers, and we've all experienced, or a lot of people have experienced that. The 2 things that I always remember with my, Bengali great aunt, who I learned a lot of Bengali cooking from. One thing I would ask her a measurement, and she would always use the word ektu, which is a Bengali word, means just a little. Well, just a little from a grandmother who was 4'11", and just a little when you're a big fat, banana fingers like me, is 2 different things. So I always remember that, and people go, how much? And I go, I have no idea. It's just I try to do a little. And the other thing that I remember from her, and this is just a humorous one, whenever I tried to get a recipe from her, she always left a couple of ingredients out because she wanted to make it for me. She didn't want me to be able to make it as well as she did. And I'm sure that's universal, but the fact that you mentioned grandmothers, I wanted to share that because I guarantee you that's universal.
Absolutely universal. But you know what's even more so? I think there's something about that secret part that's really um, and, when you come from cultures that have been colonized or enslaved and the loaded word appropriated, I think one thing that comes up a lot is this idea that somebody's watching. Somebody might, take and carry this else. I I always give recipes that I feel are sufficient.
Yep.
In other words, I've given you everything that you need to properly make it. I did not give you. It's like okay, just about anybody who is fertile can be a parent, can make a child, but not everybody's a parent. You feel what I'm saying?
I do.
So I can give you the instructions and the structure, but it's up to you to give it a soul.
That I love that. And you've written that fantastic book, Rice, A Savor of the South cookbook, which people, again, should add to their list of things to have in their kind of library at home, their food history library. So, as I said last week, I did an episode on the history of rice, and I did my best to kind of escape from that. Well, rice comes from Asia, and it went here, and then it went there, and then it went there. And obviously, there is that journey as well. But I did try to talk about the Oryza sativa Asian rice, and then also to talk about Oryza glabimera, or African rice. But as somebody who's written this terrific book on rice, I thought, well, yeah, what I need to do is to get an expert. So I wanted to kind of find out about African rice, because it's something that we don't talk about terribly much, or people don't know about, and they have this scene that it's all, what we think about, obviously. And I come from a Bengali background. My wife is Filipino American, so we talk about a lot of Asian rice, and we have our own arguments here about whether we should be having basmati or jasmine, and we talk about it. And we have fights about whether rice should stick together every day. But I would love just to tell people what African rice is. Tell people about its history. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? Because a lot of it was new to me, about it, how, the dating of it. And I came at it as a pure amateur, and I'd just love to hear from an expert about African rice.
So there are several different types of African rice species. Oryza glaberrima, which is the red rice. Mm-hmm. It has it's kind of streaked. It's a reddish brown streaked rice by nature, the grain itself. And Oryza barthai, Oryza staffi, all these are more weedy, wild rices. And by wild rice, I do not mean Zizania aquatica, North American wild rice. We're talking about, Oryza species that grow naturally. Now, these were all gathered for millennia. So long before it was cultivated, you can be assured that they were gathered in the wild. Oryza glaberrima was cultivated and has been part of, you can look at some of the cave drawings from Tassili and Jerry in Algeria, mm-hmm. which are, people don't understand that the Sahara was a grassland, a very, very lush grassland in the ancient period, let's say about 10 to 8,000 years ago. And it was called the Nursery of Africa. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when you look at some of those depictions of people in those drawings and paintings in those cave walls, you see the Berbers, you see the Wolof, you see the Yoruba, you see the Fulani, you see the Egyptians, the Nubians, all of them in those spaces. People, walking back and forth and walking with their herds of cattle and migrating and looking for water all along this vast, 3,000 mile expanse. It's stunning. But one of the things that you see in those drawings are images of women gathering grain that looks like it's not in the field, but like in a swug water.
Uh-huh.
And so this is really old. We're talking about probably about 4 to 6,000 years. The standard idea for Ariza glabrima is about 3,500 BCE.
Yep.
And then, from there, from as a domesticated crop, and then from there it helps build up Genecheno, Timbuktu, these ancient centers of African civilization. Much later on, it's joined by Rizativa by way of the Arabs and by way of the Portuguese. The groups that are on the coast really don't experience that. Rice is a trade item, but when they get rice from the Portuguese in Nigeria, southeastern Nigeria, they called it the beans of the Europeans. Like they didn't know what to make of it. It was like, okay, this is so different. But in my own travels in West Africa, I've been to 8 different nations: Senegal, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Cameroon, and Nigeria. And you see the traditional indigenous rice everywhere. Now, it was grown in certain areas. It was grown along the Niger River, or along the Gambia and Senegal rivers, and expanded wherever El Mali was. So Mali was founded by my ancestors, the Mandinka. And it kind of almost was like kind of like a Roman Empire kind of expansion. So whatever it went, its culture went, and its agriculture went. So they have these pre-empire massive cities like Old Jene and Jene, all that. And then wherever they spread out, the Mandinka were farmers as well as, artisans. So the culture went with them. The crops would spread. So there were two origin spots where it's kind of like developing, and then they merge over time. And so a large part of what's now called the Sahel, the area beneath the Sahara, and Senegambia, and the rice coast we're talking about, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Liberia, up into Mali, up into Burkina Faso, up into northern parts of Nigeria, up into southern parts of Mauritania. That's our rice region. Rice, millet, sorghum. Okay.
Yes.
As opposed to other parts of Africa where you've been, where it's cassava, yam, cassava, plantain. You get it? So it's like there are these tripartite staple crops around which the whole diet is based, and everybody eats pretty much the same way. Plant-based, although that's a very Western term, very vegivore diet, because the livestock are very, very precious.
Of course, yes.
Right, and then you have fish, but you have the staple grain plus a sauce or a stew that goes with it. That is the daily meal. And you could say that about all of sub-Saharan Africa, basically. It could be corn, it could be rice, it could be sorghum, millet, yams, plantain, sweet potato, cassava. But it's pretty much a starch, a soup, a sauce, stuff to go with it, and that's the communal daily meal. So rice had a very important role. Now, here's the next step. Rice then moves, and we can thank Judith Carney and Etta Fields Black, Daniel Littlefield, and many others for documenting this history. Peter Wood. Rice then travels across the Atlantic Ocean through the transatlantic slave trade. And one of the more important points that scholars have made in the most recent 20 years is that this was not even 20, probably 40, 50 years, is that this was not by accident. There were groups in West Africa, again, the people who were on the Guinea coast were tuber people. People on the upper Guinea coast were grain people. And there was an explicit effort made to bring people enslaved in chains to Maranhão in Brazil, to the Arbonite region in Haiti, to South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, the coast, the subtropical coast, and inland about 40 miles to grow rice. It was on purpose. And it was in different stages according to different parts of slavery. It didn't happen all at once. In North America, it was my ancestors, my Mende sixth great grandmother, who was brought during a wave that lasted between 1750 and 1775, which was the beginnings of the American Revolution, and into Charleston, South Carolina, which imported one out of every 4 Africans that ended up in the American South, a quarter. So a quarter of almost every Black American has an ancestor who was brought to Charleston.
Wow.
Yeah, and the numbers are incredible because it was this flood of people, and they were and many of them were women. In fact, that's why the DNA part is more than just identifying the ethnic roots. It actually helps shed some light on certain patterns. Like, for example, I've asked a lot of African Americans who had Mende Temne, other rice growing origins from Sierra Leone and Liberia. I said, I bet you it's your mom's side, isn't it? Or maternal. And they said, how did you know? I said, it's because the women were the ones who knew how to pound the rice and winnow it with the baskets. And I said, that was essential to, before mechanization. I mean, those seagrass, Sea Island seagrass baskets everybody admires, those were part of the process. They weren't decorative. They were part of the process of processing the rice, winnowing the rice. The standing mortar and pestle, before that was mechanized, that was, somebody had to carve those things. So there's a whole sets of knowledge had to be brought over. So I'll give you 3 more statistics to have everybody put this in perspective.
Yeah.
So rice was exported from the Low Country back to the mother country of England, and then down into the Caribbean for provision. Now, put it this way, at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which is 1 year after the trade closes from Sierra Leone and Liberia, of the 12 richest men in America, almost every single one of them has a connection to slavery. 10 of them are South Carolina rice planters. If you had a successful rice crop, a successful plantation, within 2 to 5 years, you could become the colonial equivalent of a millionaire.
Wow.
Charleston had a huge population. It had a diverse population. It had newspapers and libraries and museums. It had the kind of culture and society building wealth that New York took another century to get. Not only that, Simon, but more land was moved to construct the dams and sluices and irrigation ditches that would create the rice plantations that went from southern North Carolina to northern Florida, then was used to build the pyramids at Giza.
Just extraordinary.
All of this stuff connects. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of people, especially Americans, especially Southerners, don't know this history. And of course, the cooking part, the food part is that the rice then becomes a staple, right, of the food culture. It's etouffee with crawfish. It's jambalaya. It's Hoppin' John. It's jambalaya congri, which is basically the Louisiana version of Hoppin' John, which for Caribbean listeners is rice and peas and rice, right? It's all the above. It's red beans and rice in Louisiana. It's from the original red beans and rice from Haiti, and the riz jonjon, the rice with the black mushrooms from Haiti. It's the Bahian rice, the Mexican rice, and the rice pilau, which are all the same thing, by the way, and whose great granddaddy dish is jollof rice from West Africa.
And we had
all of it.
Yeah, I had that in my mind with, pilau and plov, and you follow those lines, and all of that you're saying comes from jollof, will have its roots in the jollof rice.
Yep, it's all there. And of course, we have deep connections to other rice traditions. For example, I'm fascinated with how Central Asia does rice, or how Southeast Asia does rice. And it's interesting how we all every rice culture has exactly the same thing. What does every rice culture do? When the rice is done and it's all at the pot, the bottom.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's fought over, right? Absolutely. And that's a big thing. Or the crust around the pot. And it's just, and there's some, the words are global. There's Silk Road means Gold Route means transatlantic slave trade. But what makes the rice of the South and the Caribbean and other places unique is that it's based on this idea from West Africa that every grain should be single and distinct, not sticky.
That is, it's just the way that you've connected that all together for me. And as I said, coming at that area as an amateur, and I think one of the reasons that we do Eat My Globe is I like to take an ingredient, and or if I'm talking about ingredients, and show just the impact that it's had, on the slave trade and moving enslaved people, the impact it's had on waterways, the impact it's had on roads, the impact it's had on just about everything. And yet you're talking about something that people go into their supermarkets now, and it's a staple, and they don't necessarily think about it. And when you pick up a bag of rice, even if you're going into a pretty basic supermarket, the history of that, both good and bad, in terms of nutrition, and then obviously in terms of enslavement and things like that, it's just extraordinary. And that's what I want people to look at. That what I really wanted to look at as well is then obviously how that's used in South Carolina, because there was this, and I don't know whether it's appropriation or from the original kind of plantation kitchens from that area where people were cooking these dishes. And then it got kind of subsumed into a Southern culture. And I say this not as a Southern person who understands it, but with a couple of kind of areas. One, that it just became food for everybody. And two, there was almost this dismissive nature of the people who originally cooked it. And they would talk about it as if it was just some intuitive thing. There was no training with these people. I've just been reading about Lena Richard. And what she complained about is that people looked at her, wrote about her as if she'd just been given this. It was an intuitive thing, not that she'd done a huge amounts of work to learn her discipline and her craft. And so I just wonder about those two aspects of it. One, about it going into Southern food and it now being just a thing of Southern food. And I know you've had conversations with people like Sean Brock and people like that about it, but also that area of what Richard felt as well.
Well, the whole thing was the Black cook was lauded and praised. But as a servant, as an enslaved person, and then it was always natural, born, intuitive. Okay, that's nice to hear to a point, but also cultivated, curated, brainy, smart, intelligent. But people, it was a very complicated narrative. Many cooks, not every cook, but many cooks had some sort of literacy. Now I'm defining that very openly and very loosely. It could be I could read but not write. It could be I could tell time. It could be I could do measurements. You have to have at least some of this to be able to cook for someone in the Western way. But you're also applying that non-Western way of cooking that we talked about earlier to these kitchens. And of course, there's a lot of American culinary historians who are very sort of like, they're still they think that the best way is to be Eurocentric. So they're desperate to claim that Southern food is British food. Not really. It's there's a lot of Britain and a lot of Germany and a lot of France there, but in no recognizable fashion. And that the go-to, the signature foods, the cultural foods are pretty much all a negotiation between Europe, Africa, and Native America. Mm-hmm. There's no question of this. So, there was even an attempt, Simon, to make a national Mammy Memorial on the mall in the 1920s. Wow. Yep, they wanted a gigantic Mammy, and yes, and it was from a North Carolina congressman, and he basically said he wanted to remind people about the good old faithful Negroes of the past. So, wow. Of course, you can see how Black people started to we knew we were great cooks. We knew we were good, not just because, some intuitive thing, but because we were the ones doing it. And we had to master it. We had to be about it. We were not just cooking for people in that capacity. We were tavern owners, and we were caterers, and we were professional cooks and personal chefs, not just enslaved cooks, not just free people of color who sorted to cook half the time. But so we kind of slid back because of those connotations. But the whole idea was you're not really that smart. You're just kind of like a machine that we turn on and turn off, and the work gets done. And that a lot of the food writing up until very recently talked about how the Southern table groaned, but never talked about the trauma or the triggers or the action and thought and care and the troubled nuance that went into putting the food on the table. The food didn't fly onto the table. Yeah. The food was prepared and put there. And sometimes, when some people get upset with this, I think it's politicizing the food in the past. No, but let's be real. Every single person on earth has a female ancestor who saw a child die in birth. Mm-hmm. Every single human on the planet. You don't think that those women live with the stress in their bodies from daily work, the stress in their bodies from, the idea that you really want to love your children and love them into the world. And sometimes they don't make it. And sometimes it's so bad that you don't make it. Yeah. You think they didn't take that with them into the act of domestic work? You don't think that cooks who worked for people who were of higher status or royalty in their society didn't lament the fact that their life sucked? Or that there were certain pleasures and pleasantries that they enjoyed that other people of their ilk didn't, but at what cost? So I'm just trying to say that there are other ways to look at the inequalities, the emotions. One of the things that is so important about understanding the role of Black cooks in the African Atlantic period is that there is a definite pride in their work, pride in their food, pride in their creation. Yeah. But at the same time, they understand they're in chains, they're imprisoned. Can you imagine that these having sometimes these feelings of having raised generations within a family? How much of that belongs to you? Yeah. How much of it doesn't? I will tell you something. I was in Charleston. Thanks to COVID, I haven't traveled a whole lot, but I had to be in Charleston for something. And I went to one of the houses of one of the wealthiest slave traders and planters in the city. And I sometimes as an interpreter, as a museum person, I've had moments that were very emotional and very powerful. And this one was, I go in there, I walk through from where the kitchen was, which was not just a room, it was a kitchen house. Because in the South at the time, there were separate buildings. Mm-hmm. Kitchen. Now, the enslaved were in that kitchen making that purlieu, which was seasonal, right?
Yes.
duck purloo, crab purloo, turtle, or even the soups, right? Okra soup, oyster soup with peanut, on and on and on and on.
Wonderful.
With the rice, right? And so they're making these foods that come from their heritage, but as they walk in, the building is such that they cannot see the guests, and the guests cannot see them. Their labor is walled off on the other side, blocked off from the garden even, where they slaughter the animals, where they bring things in from the market, where they bring things in from the little garden that was there. And the only people that can actually see both worlds is the presiding butler.
Wow.
And he walks in, and you go, Simon, I'm telling you, you see the front door, and then your front door is here, and then over here is this, sizable, not huge, but sizable dining room set with the best silver from London, set with the best mahogany wood from tropical Asia, set with the best whatever. And when I walked up, you see this massive staircase built by enslaved craftsmen, and your feet hit the spot that has an indentation. Guess where that indentation was? That's where the butler had to stand over and over, and then his predecessor, and then for generations. And then I realized something, like it was like something like an emotional train went through me. And it was the realization that it was like a little message going, I was around all of this and none of it was mine. I worked for all of this, none of it was mine.
Extraordinary. To be in a contemporary setting and to experience, we talk about, time tunnels and going back and experiencing history. And to have that impact on your personality, your DNA immediately, that's hard to even explain to people. That
right. Wow. It's blood memory. It's the fact that I've been to other plantations and plantation houses where you see that same indentation in the wood. Mm-hmm. And you know what that was? That was where they stood. It was, that's where the person had to stand. So you corroborate that with written testimony and descriptions, and you go, this is no joke. This is no joke. But the idea that this African staple became a Southern staple, we haven't even talked about rice pudding in Texas or the rice cala, the fritters in Louisiana, which were also eaten in other places as well. They're not just, there. But I think some of these dishes died out. Why did they die out? Because the institution of slavery ended. And then after that, the people who worked in the houses stopped working in the houses. I wonder why. But the food, we often ask the question and say to people, I wonder whatever happened to that dish. Well, the class forces change dishes.
Michael, I had here in my kind of list of questions, very functional, very questions about, what happened to Asian rice coming in and what happened to the travel. But it seems almost crass of me to ask those questions now when you've shared so much personal about it. And so I'd rather not kind of do that terribly and talk about, because I was going to go, I know people are trying to recreate the original kind of rice and Carolina Gold and all of that. But I think what you've said then and what you've said throughout this is probably almost where we need to be. You need to, when you look at rice, when you get rice, when you cook with rice, particularly here in the United States, remember that. Remember its impact on our society. Remember that the capitalism of what created the society came from that staple. And what I hope is that people will listen to this. You're incredible. You can see me. I'm leaning forward, listening to you talk, because I know you're a storyteller, and I'm just excited by it and horrified by it. And But what I want is rather to kind of stop there talking about rice, because I think you've told us everything. You've told us the story, and rather than me ask crass questions about how it came over and changed and the dishes and the blah blah blah, I'd love to leave it there and move on, just to talk now about what's exciting in your life, what's coming out, because I think you've given us everything we need to know about rice, because you've given it from what you always do, a very personal point of view rather than that functional point of view. And I hope that's okay. I just feel that this is the right place to.
And you just have to. This is a part of our personal, our life stories, right?
Absolutely. And when I hear you talking about it, I could ask you, all kinds of like crass functional questions about it, traveling around and doing this, that, and that. People can go and read your book for that, and we'll get them to go and do that. But what I'd love to do now is just find out, because I'm so grateful that you took the time to come on. Before I ask you, we always finish, and it seems slightly crass to do this again at the end of when that's to talk, but we always like to finish with some fun questions at the end, because I like to show that everyone is just a human being. But also, before we do that, let's just talk about what's exciting you right now, what you're working on.
Well, I'm working on the beginnings of 2 projects, one short, one long. The short one is an answer to the work of Michael Pollan, in the sense of I want what I'm calling the Little Black Food Book.
Oh.
Yes. And I'm writing it with the generation in mind that's younger, that may not understand that all of these historic and cultural pieces, they weren't there for a long time. They were there in mosaic form, but they weren't in one spot. So I want to create a received tradition. You must create not a singular narrative, but something that weaves the narratives together. So I want it to be partly humor, partly functional, partly practical, partly historical, but something you could put in your back pocket and take with you from spot to spot. Something that your mother and father can give you, and you can, take it to your home and build a tradition out of. And the other one is I'm working with Fade and Press to do one of their cookbook Bibles, the Cookbook Bible of the American South.
Oh.
500 recipes. It's going to be extensive. Lots of information, lots of essays, lots of recipes. So that's going to be a big deal. It's actually been, it's going to take me 3 years.
Gosh.
So a lot of things like that.
Both of those when they come out, and if Eat My Globe is still going, we would love to have you come on and talk about those. Hi everybody, this is Simon Majumdar, the creator and host of the Eat My Globe Food History podcast. Now, those of you who have been listening to the podcast since we began over 2 years ago, nearly 50 episodes so far, will know that we have never sought out sponsorship for the podcast. It's very much been a labour of love. However, along the way, a large number of people have approached us suggesting they would like to support the podcast. And so, we have opened up a page on patreon.com to allow those of you who listen regularly to do just that. Any support we will get will allow us to purchase research materials, buy ingredients for recipes, and maybe, when we can get out and about, to bring you some very special in-the-field reporting. But, and this is really important, this is not just a one-way street. For varying levels of membership of our Patreon club, there will be access to fantastic Eat My Globe swag, including that incredible chopping board so many of you have written to me about, recipes based on historical periods about which we chat each week, video shout-outs, signed pictures, and even along the way some very special episodes just for members. So,
If you've enjoyed the episodes of Eat My Globe you've listened to so far and would like us to make many more into the future, do head over to www.patreon.com/eatmyglobe and consider taking out a membership. Any support will be much appreciated. Remember, that's www.patreon.com/eatmyglobe. So thank you very much. Keep listening.
So, okay, and I said this is a bit after we've had so many incredible conversations through this, but I am going to ask you some fun questions because I always do. Sure. And so here are some of the fun questions if you're up for them. So if there was a period in time where you could return to experience a meal, a style of meal, a drink, a cocktail, whatever it was, when would it be?
Oh, wow. I've had to think about this a lot. I think that the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, yep.
At its height, when, there were hundreds of courses and, to leave a hospital, you had to be able to eat a whole chicken by yourself. So goes the myth. I just kind of want to see if I had the ability to do time travel. I think it would be 1 week in the height of each season.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, and that's only one of them. I think the Romans. I mean, you're gonna laugh at this. When I was younger, please. When I was an elementary school student, one of my favorite programs was iClaudius.
Oh, I love it. I watch it every year.
And it's like, I every time they had a food scene, it was remarkable to me. So yeah, I have a couple of those, like New York in the 70s.
New York in the 70s, I interviewed Jacques Pepin and talked to 50s and 60s and talking to him about eating at La Pavillon or wow. some of those. I would love, that would be up on there for me. So I definitely agree with that. Okay, now, if there was a dish named after you, what would it be?
Oh my God. Okay, we've made this hard. So now I'm gonna whittle this down. A dish named after me. I would, you know what? I would have to rename my Kosher Soul rolls.
Kosher Soul rolls.
Yes, my pastrami collard green egg rolls.
Oh wow! Oh, just actually the thought of that makes me very hungry right now.
Yes, and I prefer the little crispy spring roll wrappers to everything else. But to me, yeah, because I've always said you can put, you can create any identity in a spring roll.
Absolutely.
And do whatever you want with it. And so I think that would be it. Okay,
I think that's a great answer. And finally, as someone who I know has probably seen dozens of inventions as you're traveling around, and what do you think the single most important invention in the history of food and beverage?
I think the mixer, the standing mixer. It really is, the workhorse.
Yes, that's a great answer.
Yeah, that would be it. And of course, they have many different forms. Of course, we know the main form is status symbol today. But I mean, just the idea that how many backs have been broken leaning over a floor kneading dough.
Yep.
How many hands were arthritic from the process?
Still are when I meet some of my baking friends. So, Michael, before you go, I'd love you just to share your social media, just so everybody can find you. They can go find your books.
Sure. On Twitter, I'm at Kosher Soul, at Kosher Soul, KOSHERSOUL. On Instagram, I am at The Cooking Gene, so the title of the book, at The Cooking Gene. My Facebook fan page is Michael W. Twitty. Michael W. Twitty. And my blog, which I hope to revamp and reboot, it's still there, is Afro Culinaria. AFROCULINARIA, Afro Culinaria. And, you know, once you write books and other things, the blogosphere is hard to return to.
Absolutely. So, Michael, let me just say a huge thank you. I'm so humbled that you took time to come on. Your books are extraordinary. Just remind everyone, go and check out the Rice book, go and check out Kosher Soul, go and check out the Cooking Gene. You will really not regret it. Please make sure you have those in your library.
Well, thank you, and y'all be well.
Do make sure to check out the website associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we used putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favorite podcast provider. That really makes a difference. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar, and we'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much But It's Ours and Producergirl Productions, and is created with the kind cooperation of the UCLA Department of History. We would especially like to thank Professor Carla Pastana, the Department Chair of the Department of History, and Dr. Tawny Paul, Public History Initiative Director, for their notes on this episode. Also, a huge thank you to Sybil Villanueva for her help with the research and the preparations of the transcripts for this episode, which can be found on the website.